Great. So welcome, everyone. As always with webinars, we'll give it a little bit of time to let the room fill up, but it's good to see some of you already coming on board. This webinar today is going to last around an hour. We've got some great experts, and we're going to be discussing how we can distribute a COVID-19 vaccine around Asia and also the key challenges involved. We do have a poll that is up and running, which is all about whether you would take a regulated vaccine if it was available to take tomorrow. We have a vaccine expert on the panel today in John, who I'll introduce shortly. And hopefully he can is nice and safe. So it's great to see some of you already answering that poll. In terms of questions, there's also a chat box on the right-hand side. Please answer questions throughout the webinar. We will get to as many as possible, and we'll answer them throughout and at the end. But hopefully we'll cover a lot of the questions asked in the webinar itself. We also have had some questions that have been pre-submitted to us, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much if you did pre-submit some questions, and it's great to have you all on board. Okay, so the number seems to be leveling out, and there's a lot of you in the room, which is great to see. So we'll start by doing a few introductions. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Michael. Michael, would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Sure, thank you, Matt, and to Intelsius for inviting me today. So I'm based in Singapore. I've been here 22 years. It's my home. 35 years in logistics across the airline industry and freight forwarding couriers. The last 8 years was in specialist logistics around clinical trial, clinical trial logistics and supply chain. And for the last 9 months, I've been a consultant to the World Health Organization to advise and help on the emergency logistics around COVID-19. My capacity today really is as an independent. I don't represent the World Health today, so just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Michael. And it's fantastic to have you on board. Next, we have the CEO of Intelsius Asia. Lim, it's fantastic to have you today. Could you give us a little bit of background in your experience of the cold chain?
Hi, everybody. My name is Lim. I'm the CEO of Asia. So before I begin, let me say hello to some of my friends in different languages. In Thai, Sawadee Krap. The Korean will be Annyeonghaseyo. The Indonesian friends will be Selamat Datang. The Hong Kong friends would be Lei Ho, Pun Ying. Singaporean friends would be welcome, or in Mandarin, Ni Hao. The Malaysian will be Selamat Datang or Selamat Petang. The Indian friends will be Warakam. The German friends will be Guten Tag or Guten Morgen. The English ones, not to forget, will be welcome. So we've got quite a few friends here from all over the world. So first of all, I'd like to thank Matt for organizing this, Jens to come on board, and also Michael and John to come on board. So I'm the CEO of Asia. So certainly coming from this part of the world, there will be certain conditions or challenges that to distribute vaccine. So that's why Intelsius have got on the panel here to discuss about the challenges and also the hot, humid temperature that Malaysia has. At the same time, while we are experiencing hot and humid here in Asia, our friends in Korea, China, is experiencing winter, which is -20. The Korean winter will be -20. So it'll be a challenge to distribute vaccine, which, as we know today, the Pfizer, the AstraZeneca, the Sinovac, the Moderna, all of them have got different temperatures. So we are here hopefully to answer some of the questions that have been posed earlier. So thank you very much for coming.
Great. Thanks very much, Lim, and lovely to have you on board as well. Next, we'll move across to the Intelsius Technical Director, Jens Mangelsen. Jens, could you give us a brief insight into your experience and your role at Intelsius?
Sure, Matt. Thank you for the introduction. My background is over 15 years of temperature control logistics, initially coming from information systems. So For many, many years, I was a user of qualified packaging solutions, mainly in the area of R&D, clinical trials, and so on. And for 4.5 years now, I'm in charge for the product development here at Intelsius. So everything we develop and all the products we offer.
Great, fantastic, Jens. And it'll be really exciting to hear about some of the latest product developments at Intelsius that we'll touch on later in the call. Mm-hmm. Finally, we have a professor at Warwick University who has significant experience in vaccines, cold chain, etc. It's my great pleasure to introduce John Lyon. John, could you tell us a little bit about your experience?
I will. So good morning, everybody, and it's nice to be on a global webinar. I was the global vice president of a company called Covance, which is one of the major drug developers in the world. It was my clinic in Leeds that discovered Viagra for Pfizer, and also we did the development of Herceptin and many of the blockbusters. So for the last 30 years, I've been involved with drug development on an international and global level. My chair is actually in business, so I cross between clinical science, medicine, and finance.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, John. So as you can see, we've got a vast array of experts on board. So any questions that you do have throughout the call, put them in the chat box on the right-hand side, and we'll get through as many as possible. If you do want to ask any questions after the webinar or while it's going on, but you don't want them to be in the chat box, please email us at marketing@intelsius.com, and I'll make sure the questions are distributed to the correct expert and we can get an answer for you as soon as possible. So with that, we'll kick off. As discussed, we're looking at the key challenges of distributing throughout Asia. We'll touch on infrastructure, waste management, visibility throughout the cold chain. But firstly, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the COVID-19 vaccines and the leading candidates. Obviously, a huge amount of work being done on this, and a lot of vaccines in production going through the final regulatory stages. So I'm going to pass over to John, who's going to talk us through the characteristics of a vaccine. But just before I do, I'll come to the poll results. The poll was, would you take a regulated vaccine if it was available tomorrow? 31% of you had said yes, 17% have said no, and 50% have said undecided. So quite a lot of people in the middle ground, John. So we'll pass over to you, and you can talk over the characteristics of the vaccine. We do have a short presentation for this, so I will just share that.
That's great. Okay, good morning, everybody. It's very, very illuminating, I think, the stats that we've just seen, that there's such a lot of maybe skepticism as to whether these viruses are safe. So one of the things I want to do this morning, more than anything, is to dispel a number of myths. Before we actually get into the very short slide show, I just want to say something initially about a bit of the history of virology and why, to some extent, we're right at the point of the time when I believe virology will become very much a mainstream drug development area. Because in the past, it has obviously had attention, but probably not the attention that it deserves. And I think one of the upsides, and I think we've always got to look for upsides of challenges of COVID-19, is that there is an awful lot of underlying science now that will be turned into very good drug development in the area of virology. And before we move to the first slide, I just want to tell you a little bit, just a minute on the history of virology in terms of drug development. If you go back to, I'm sure many of you have had measles jabs or yellow fever, and traditionally these are virus vaccines that use a weakened or a deactivated version of the disease. So actually we will inject somebody with either a deactivated or a very weak form of the antigen and allow the body to form its own antibodies. And whether it be deactivated or weakened, both of these are very tried and tested, and we've had measles jabs around for a long, long time. And basically what these do in terms of the pathogens in the body, that they elicit three responses. First of all, killer T cells start to come to the fore, and they identify and destroy infected cells. Helper T cells are also elevated, which support antibody production, and then beta cells, antibody producing, also target other pathogens. So there are three immune type of responses that the body starts to evolve once an antigen is injected into the body. Okay, so that is the old way of doing vaccines. The good news today is that there is far better science, and what I want to do is go through, if you like, the candidates that we have both regulated now and those that will go to the regulators in the next few weeks, with a total different new type of science, and explain why we can do this a lot faster now and a lot safer than maybe in the past. So if I may, could I ask for the first slide, please? So, as I say, traditionally vaccines have been based on injecting this inactivated virus, and that's fine, it's safe, and it's been around a long time. There are two types of new platform, and I'm going to just concentrate in a minute on the use of messenger RNA, mRNA, as a platform. But there are other types as well, which are basically viral vector-based vaccines, and that's a bit like the AstraZeneca University of Oxford vaccine. Non-replicating vector vaccines are unable to make new viral particles. They only produce the vaccine antigen. And then when the antigen is seen by the body, effectively, it elicits the three types of immune response I've already stated. So instead of actually injecting an inactivated or a weakened virus, this time we're just putting in a little bit of genetic material. And I'm going to explain in a minute why that is so safe and why it's a good way of actually changing from the old regime of actually injecting antigen to using genetic material. So as I said, there are two types. There's messenger RNA, and because the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are both mRNA based, I'm going to go through the science of that a little bit more, but just to bear in mind, others are coming along that are viral vector-based vaccines that are based more on DNA. But I don't want to go too heavily into the science, because this morning, that's not what this webinar's about. But the key here is, by using genetic material, there are two reasons why we can shorten a drug development program. A lot of people ask me, surely this has only been tested for less than 12 months or 18 months or 24 months. It normally takes 10 years to develop a drug. How can this be safe in that regime? So please, second slide, the next slide, if I may. So the critical question to answer is, too many people believe it, maybe not. Now, it's interesting, the survey that we just done is backed up by prior surveys. There was a November survey across 15 countries that found 54% of people were worried about side effects. Why does that matter? I actually believe this is the number one risk. It's actually not the virus itself, it's that the society itself is worried about possible side effects from the vaccine. So it really is a question, I think, that needs addressing. So next slide, if I may, please. So it is safe. Why is it safe? Well, first of all, whether it be mRNA or the DNA, it's very specific, and it's designed only to trigger a specific response to the virus's spike protein. And that's really good news. That means it doesn't do any damage whatsoever to the host. It is specifically designed to attack a protein that's the spike. I don't know if you've ever seen the coronavirus, but it has spikes. And what mRNA genetic material in this case does, it's designed to actually see that virus spike protein. The good news is it doesn't enter the nucleus. That means it doesn't alter our DNA. There's no carcinogenic effects. It's very safe. And that is one of the first things a drug developer would look at. The third thing is it actually degrades itself within days. So it actually goes in there, gets the T cells and the B cells, as stated before, activated, and then it degrades. And that's one reason, by the way, in terms of storage, which we're going to talk about a little later, why it's important that we use professional storage capability in moving these vaccines around. Corners have not been cut in the clinical development process. And the reason for that is twofold. One is we were fortunate to actually have the genetic code of the virus earlier this year, and that was a huge help. Normally in drug development, that takes a few years to get to. And then the second thing is mRNA has been used for a decade already by looking at cancer vaccines. So it's not a new technology. It's one that's been around, that's well established. So hence those two things together have enabled the drug developers not to cut corners, but to actually move a lot faster. And that is key. And that is one of the messages I think we need to get out to society, that there are two very good reasons that this is safe and hence is usable by patients, or should I say, healthy volunteers. So in the Pfizer vaccine, 0.63% of the active group and 0.5% of the placebo group only showed adverse events. And that, to be honest, is very small. And none of those adverse events were, hugely concerning. The MHRA in the UK now have stated the vaccine should not be given to subjects with known anaphylaxis to medicines or foods. And that's fine. And that is what you would expect with a vaccine. So the bottom line to all of this, nothing's come out to date of the data or the trials that would suggest that these vaccines are unsafe, and indeed just the opposite. Next slide, please. So the mode of action is understood. I told you before the three types of immune response, the induction of local inflammatory reaction triggering immune response. So the science is understood. Of course, there'll be some short-term local discomfort. There is for any jab, but it's literally just soreness at the site and maybe, 24 hours feeling a bit groggy. But that's a great price to pay to be vaccinated against this horrible disease. And with any drug, you've always got to ask the question, is the return greater than the risk? And, I would basically say to those on the webinar today, think of that. Think of all the risks that not only this virus can inflict on an individual, but also on society as a whole, and what the very, very, very small risks are compared to those returns. So I believe it's an excellent platform to combat other viruses also going forward. Now, this is really interesting because, okay, COVID's the enemy today. What will be the enemy tomorrow? There'll be other viruses around. And hence, I believe that the whole of the mRNA and DNA nuke platform will be a great start to combating many of the viruses going forward, and we're going to need it. That may be the last slide. Let's just see. It is.
Yep, that's the last slide. But
okay,
thank you very much for that. That was really interesting.
My pleasure.
Just a question from me. With regards to the different vaccine platforms that are being used, do you think the mRNA vaccine platforms will become much more dominant in future years?
I think not just mRNA, you take the DNA platform as well, bearing in mind the AstraZeneca's DNA. So if you look at this as the genetic influence, 100% I am confident that this is the new shape of the way that vaccine development will be. And hence what we're learning today, particularly about stability and storage and logistics, is something that we need to continue, as a learning curve to get up, and will be very relevant in the next decade and 2 decades to come.
Okay, fantastic. And could you tell us a little bit about why temperature control is needed to maintain efficacy of these types of vaccines?
Yeah, so because genetic material per se tends to be quite fragile in many respects, taking either down to -80. In the case of the AstraZeneca, that will only be required more at ambient or minus, sort of between -2 and -7, whereas we know that the Pfizer needs to be stored at -70, -80, those kind of temperatures. And that's because genetic material has been used. And hence, if there's any professional input needed, it's certainly in this area, because that is very different to vaccine in the past that have basically just been the antigen itself.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll stop that presentation now. That was really interesting. So thank you very much to John. We'll go ahead and reset the poll that was done shortly before about whether you would take the vaccine tomorrow if a fully regulated one did come into force. So I'll reset that now. Hopefully you'll have a little bit more information. So that has been started again for you again to fill in your answers at the right-hand side. We will come back to that towards the end of the webinar, but it'd be interesting to see if any of you have changed your mind or if you're still a little bit undecided. But thanks very much, John. That was really interesting. We may come back to you with a few questions throughout the webinar, so please stay online. Now we'll just go ahead and focus a little bit on the specific challenges to Asia. Lim, could I come over to you first, and could you give us a brief picture of the Asia market, what vaccines are currently being purchased, and some of the key challenges you feel from an Asia perspective?
Sure. Before I go on, I would like to, I forgot to introduce our distinguished guest today on the webinar. Is invited by our DGP Singapore, Mr. Sean Tan, to invite Mr. Wee Jian Shing. He's the Enterprise Singapore partner, so to come on board. So welcome, Mr. Wee. Yes, to answer your question, from what we read, certainly in the news, of course, it's changing every hour. Malaysia government have actually announced that they will purchase the Pfizer vaccine subject to FDA approval. So it's been approved. So I guess Malaysia will government will have be purchasing the Pfizer. On top of the Pfizer, the next one, which is also in the program, is the COVAX vaccine, which is the 60-country collaboration to bring in the COVAX. As to Thailand, will be AstraZeneca, has been announced in the news as well. Indonesia have their 1 over million Sinovac biotech delivered to Indonesia already in Jakarta. Korea, what we understand is, again from the news, is Pfizer #1, followed by Moderna, and then followed by AstraZeneca. Singapore would be Pfizer and Moderna. So as to Hong Kong, it will be Pfizer as well. So I guess the first to market is key to success in this vaccine, isn't it? Right. So John has just explained that you know, it is relatively very safe to administer the vaccine. So mentioning earlier that, you know, different countries have made this different decision on different vaccine purchase. Being in Asia, we have, I think, 2 over billion people, being the RCEP being signed recently. So there is a 26 country involved, the Asian country, and Asia is small, but it's not that small. Huh? We have about 2 billion people and about 26 countries in the Asia region. So temperature ranges from where we are, Thailand, Singapore, which is very constant because we sit in the tropical. Our temperature is all year throughout. People ask me the question a lot of time, you know, what is the weather there? What is the temperature? I always say we have 2 seasons, hot and hotter. So, so we're either hot or we are very hot. So as compared to the New Zealand, Australia, as to the Thailand, northern Thailand, Korean, Japan, certain part of China is typically 4 seasons, which is what is being experienced in Europe countries. So yeah, this is what is happening right now, and I believe it will be changing as well as we speak, because there will be administered from the vaccine to the people. So back to you, man.
Great, thanks very much for that, Lim. Just to go back to the poll quickly, it seems like there are a few more people saying yes, they would take a regulated vaccine if it was available tomorrow. So that has increased to 41%, 46% now. It's changing all the time, seemingly more people saying yes. A few people still would not take the vaccine at 15%, but that figure has again dropped since the first poll. And only 38% are undecided now. So yes has become a favourite, which is really good to hear. We also had a couple of questions about that piece, John. One has been about how humidity affects the storage of a vaccine.
That is something I can't answer because I don't know the answer to that. So I'll be totally honest. That's something that I'll have to pass to somebody else because I've not actually studied that. I don't know.
No problem. That's completely fine. We will do a little bit of research on all the questions, and we'll also get back to you in due course as well. We've also been asked if they were ever dropped at any stage. Jens, I think this would be a question for you about how packaging can protect a vaccine in the cold chain. How do packaging solutions protect vaccine vials when they are dropped? Could you give us a bit of information on that, please?
Yes, so most of the packaging solutions we offer, for example, are in a qualified packaging that offers drop testing or comes with a drop testing, mainly especially for a long time for the dry ice packaging.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Fantastic. So I will end that poll now. We are going to do one final poll at this webinar. So this is just going to be, again, as you've heard from Lim, there's a lot of different vaccine candidates going around. So we want to know what you're preparing for, whether it's fridge vaccines at 2 to 8 degrees, frozen vaccines at -20 degrees, or deep frozen vaccines at -80 degrees. What do you expect to be the most prevalent for Asia? So that poll is shared now. Next, Michael, I'm going to come to you for the first time. Could you explain how you see it about the specific challenges with regards to Asia vaccine distribution?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and hopefully I'm coming across clear. We have a bit of a thunderstorm coming on in Singapore, and it does affect the internet speed. I really think it depends on which vaccines the Asian countries are deciding on. So obviously there has been some interest and some commitments for the Pfizer, BioNTech, New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore. So I think, to the major cities, I don't foresee any challenges. Getting vaccines even at -80 is nothing new for specialist logistics companies. Packaging is out there, refrigerators or deep freezers, airlines, they all know how to handle this. I think the challenge will come if these vaccines are going to perhaps countries that don't have such great infrastructure. When you look at the United States, how the Pfizer was rolled out, it was a military operation. It was a perfectly orchestrated public-private partnership with the U.S. military, the government, the Senate, FedEx, UPS, all took their part, and it rolled out from what we can see, pretty good. I think when you take countries, such as Indonesia, Philippines, with so many islands, it's impossible to get that kind of scalability. So I think that many countries in Asia will probably wait until there's a vaccine which is around the standard temperatures between 2 and 8. Having said that, again, I think the deep frozen Pfizer would be accessible to major cities, and I see that many countries are sort of not putting all their bets on one vaccine. It's a mixed. AstraZeneca, the Oxford University, I think they've gone down the path where they want to look at local partnerships. So they will manufacture in Australia, they will manufacture in Thailand. And this helps not only create, obviously, a sense of national pride because the vaccine is made in that country, but it also makes the logistics a lot easier. You don't have to fly millions and millions of vials around the world. So I think, the challenges in Asia is obviously infrastructure, it's temperature requirements. There is a little bit of risk on counterfeit, and that's something else we can probably talk about later. But I think as long as the public and the private companies start collaborating, it should be doable.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Michael. Just to touch on the poll results quickly. It seems like most people are preparing for fridge 2 to 8 degrees, with 70% of people answering saying that's the one that they think will have most distribution around Asia. Frozen at -20 is coming in at only around 12%. And the deep frozen vaccines, -80, the Pfizer vaccine, for example, that's at around 21%. So it does appear there is going to be quite a mix. Jens, could you talk us a little bit about the variety of Intelsius packaging and the different temperature ranges it can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. So from what we heard so far already, and we all know from all the recent information we've seen in the internet and publications over the last few months, there was a lot of dry eyes kind of dominance when it comes, and we see the rollout in the US also focusing a lot of on dry eyes. And actually, dry eyes packaging is kind of in our core area of packaging for many years. But more importantly, for quite a while now, we're focusing on the other temperature ranges as well, because what we heard also from John is we will see a mix of temperature requirements here, and especially from the last poll, we heard that there is an expectation, especially for the Asian market, that 2 to 8 might be even more important. And therefore, we've been focusing for quite a while on all the temperature ranges mentioned already, so -80, 2 to 8 degrees, -20 degrees, and different solutions for all of them. So there are single-use applications or single-use packaging solutions for scenarios where return logistics might be a problem, but there's also multi-use or reusable packaging, which might be very important because of the pure scale of the project over the next 1 or 2 years compared to single-use packaging. And then there's also the question about return logistics and return of waste, biomedical waste, used packaging and all that. So we lined up a packaging portfolio from small to large across all 3 temperature ranges in all the different scenarios. And it is really crucial to understand the specifics of a project to identify the right solution for it. There's not the one. We heard a lot about the dry ice packaging over the last few weeks and months, but this will change also with stability data coming in over the next few months and years. So this will move. So maybe products that will start at -20 will move to 2 to 8 because that's kind of the standard for many years and much easier to roll out. And companies will move into that direction if possible. So from our perspective as a packaging provider, a full lineup for all the temperature ranges, all the sizes, pre-qualified is crucial, and all of them will be used.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jens. We are getting quite a lot of questions in the chat, so thank you very much. I will just run through a couple now, just so we don't have too many to go through at the end. We've had one question about the Pfizer vaccine. Once thawed, how long will the Pfizer vaccine still be viable? We believe this to be 5 days. It's still effective when thawed, as long as it's managed in fridge temperatures, so in a stable environment. So thank you very much for that question. We also have a question around compliance of the packaging ends. Could you tell us a bit about Intelsius solutions, the compliance and the accreditations they have?
Yeah, so it's a mix depending on the requirement when it comes to temperature. So effectiveness of the we heard that already of the vaccine is when it comes to transportation and packaging, temperature is kind of the most important factor to look at. So that means the temperature critical packaging we offer is pre-qualified in our lab against industry standard temperature profiles, and we provide all these packaging solutions with the reports so that the performance depends a little bit on size and temperature range, but the 4 to 5 days are covered by all the packaging solutions we offer.
Okay, thanks very much, Jens. And the final question now, Lim, I'll come across to you if that's okay. We've had a question about how Southeast Asian countries can bear the cost of a vaccine rollout. There has been some research about AstraZeneca have announced it's going to be at cost price, so they're not going to make a profit on it. But for the colder vaccines that are coming into market, how will Southeast Asia countries cope with the cost? Could you give us a bit of information on that, please?
We all hope to have this Singapore government where Singapore government has announced that it will be free vaccine for everybody. But apparently, we still have not got any news from Malaysia whether the vaccine will cost us what cost, because it's still subject to approval. Till today, they have not announced it. Certainly from Thailand, which they have announced AstraZeneca. Again, the Thai government have not announced whether it will cost the Thai people any money to be vaccinated. Indonesia is the same. Korea, we have not heard how much the Korean government is going to charge again, but technically or historically, Korean government has been very generous, like the Singapore government, where they will administer the vaccine FOC. Hong Kong, I think it's also free of charge as well, where it will be given to the public health. A lot of this vaccine, how much is going to impact the public here in Asia country? I think the distribution cost and the cost of the vaccine and the efficacy of the vaccine, if it is not transported or stored or delivered correctly, will impact the patient or the people, the public, having to get the vaccine. So I guess the key is here on the webinar is for us to tell the public here or the participants here that there are technology out there by Intelsius, and in working with the right regulatory, that all our packaging are compliant, and that if you store them correctly with our packaging, I'm sure we will solve the 50% of the problem, which is the efficacy of the drug as is being transported, whether it's -20, 228, or -20. So there are different type of technology out there, but I think working with the Intelsius in our pipeline here, I'm sure everybody who is attended has got their own leads. Example, Mr. To from Korea, Darika or Kuntip from Thailand, DGP, Sean Tan and Pak Daniel in Indonesia, Mr. Daniel Woon from Malaysia. We all have been in contact with all this distribution company, or we call it 3PL or 4PL, to ensure that the vaccine are being stored correctly. So to answer your question, Matt, there is no public announcement on government on the cost of vaccine to the public.
Okay, thanks very much. So we'll leave
Matt, if I could just interject. I mean, there is, of course, a global consortium, which is COVAX, which is leading, the negotiations with the pharma companies to make sure that there's fair and equitable distribution, especially to those lower income countries. And I think that's important. COVAX is working with UNICEF. UNICEF is preparing to distribute 2 billion vials, 2 billion doses next year at a very, very low price. So I think that will also help lower income countries. The idea is to cover the 3% of the population, which is the healthcare workers, and then up to 20%, which are those at risk. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Michael. So hopefully we've answered that question for now. I've seen a few more questions pop up, but we will crack on with the topics and then get to them questions later, if that's okay. Next, we're going to chat a little bit about why visibility throughout the cold chain is so important, and also keeping the vaccine secure and safe. So Michael, can you talk us through a little bit about cold chain security?
Sure. I think visibility has typically in our industry been passive, which means that the shipment will travel with a temperature monitor, and once it arrives at the destination, you download the information on a computer, and you see the record. Unfortunately, that's too late. If something happens along the way, you actually want to know before it happens and actually intervene. So again, taking the example of Pfizer's boxes actually have GPS tracking devices in them, which transmits not only position, but temperature, which is then monitored by a 24-hour control center. And the combination of people and technology makes sure that those vaccines go to the right places at the right time, at the right temperature. Anything that can't do that, honestly, is putting the vaccine at risk. And, we don't have a lot of vaccine to waste. So we've got to get it right. And I think that's why visibility is important, just not only to ensure that the chain of custody is there, but also to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jens, could you talk a little bit about Intelsius real-time connected solutions and how they work?
Yes, absolutely. In 2019, I was going back too far. That's not true. We launched a version of our Orca packaging range, which is Orca MX, which includes or comes with real-time visibility options. And the approach we had was that we don't select one device available on the market, but design a high-performance packaging, 96 hours plus, 4 temperature ranges that can be used with market-leading devices and also future devices. So these packaging solutions provide position, so global, the location of the packaging in real time. There are intervals to update the portal, so it's not real time, every minute, but it is very, very accurate. You can track it every few hours, but you can even decide if you want a shorter interval, but it has an effect on battery life and things like that, but that's very tactical. The range comes with the option to add different solutions and also future solutions. And we launched that, as I said, 1.5 years ago, and it's available also for dry ice packaging now, with an external sensor or a probe that goes into the dry ice, and the device is outside. And we will launch early next year a portal for the visibility of the data that allows to see different devices in the same portal. So you can kind of mix and match devices and see different solutions in different areas of the world, having or using one dashboard. And you can use the platform, the hardware platform you prefer, or maybe already use hardware devices. So it's not the one solution, not the one device we say you need to use. We had a more open approach to say, pick the one that's best for you. Otherwise, we can make suggestions. So that's available for all the temperature ranges we just discussed and across 4 sizes.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jens. And I think the open source nature and the flexibility of the Orca Connect packaging is really important. For further information on that packaging, how it works, its durations, you can download some files at the right-hand side in the Dry Ice Packaging Solutions PDF and the 2-to-8 Packaging Solutions PDF. But we'll move on to the next topic now, which is all going to be about waste management. A hugely important factor is how much waste is going to be produced on the back of this vaccine. We have had a question, actually, are the vaccines packed in glass or plastic bottles? Do we have any information on that from anyone within our panel at the time?
I think, John, you're the expert, but from what I can see, it's glass. So far it's glass.
That's what I've seen as well, but I couldn't say whether plastic was safe or not, but certainly glass is acceptable.
Okay. So just with that, the amount of vaccines we're talking about being produced, it seems there's going to be a massive production of glass and also a waste of glass. How big of a problem do you see this waste being, Michael? Could you speak a bit about that, please?
So, there are very strict regulations about how you deal with biohazard waste, and this is biohazard waste. Everybody is focused on the temperature control of the vial, but there's a lot of logistics that goes around that. There's the injection itself, the syringe and the needle. There's the swabs. There's the gloves, PPE, everything else, and all of that. If you multiply that into the billions of doses, is going to add up. The proper way of destroying biowaste is incineration under control, and most governments have regulated incineration centers, but many countries don't. And how do you transport that waste? So I think this is a shout out and a call out to the logistics companies who typically are 3PL, and they can contract and go into partnership with waste management companies, specifically bio-waste companies, to come up with solutions. Now, if you consider that the logistics companies are actually taking the vaccines to the final destination, which could be deep in country, they can also take mobile incinerators with them. They're containerized. They're on wheels. You can set up a vaccination center. After days, weeks, months of completing the operation, manage the waste disposal on site, and then take the incinerator away. So it is all doable, but again, it's all about planning. But it's incredibly important, because otherwise, what's going to happen, and we've seen this in some countries, is the waste is just going to go out the back of the hospital and settle, which is, of course, is a hazard.
Yeah, Thank you very much. Jens, could I come across to you briefly? Could you discuss how packaging solutions may be an answer to this problem?
Yeah, sure. So when we started to have conversations around using more and more reusable packaging solutions to reduce waste, and also to minimize waste and reduce waste and have a better carbon footprint and all that, we had a few questions coming up because for the reusable packaging there are SOPs in place on the return for quarantine and cleaning and all that. So if they could be used to return, if shipped into regions, as Michael just explained, where maybe the systems are not available, if the waste streams are not available, if they could be used to return certain used materials, and then go into a waste stream that is appropriate on the arrival of the return leg, and then go through the cleaning process, so that these packaging solutions on the return leg, when going back into the reconditioning and refurbishment maybe and things like that, could be also used on the return leg to safely return some of these materials.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So that's the waste management piece, a really important piece of the vaccine transportation that should be looked at now. Potentially one that a lot of people will overlook in the need to get this vaccine out as quickly as possible. It's really important to do the planning and put it all in place just to make sure we're not left with a big problem following the immunization process. Before we get to the questions that were pre-submitted, we've got one final topic to discuss, and this is a difficult one to answer, but we're going to try and provide a little bit of insight. This is all on the timeline and how long this process may take. So we will come to Michael on that one, if that's okay. How long do you think the process will take to ensure this is distributed around Asia?
Well, I think again, it really depends on which vaccines the countries choose, and then COVAX will obviously have their own plans as well. But I've read a lot of statistics about the fact that we need to have 8,000 jumbo jets flying around the world. I think that the rollout is going to be careful. It's going to be staggered. It's going to be in phases. It's not just going to be a massive one door opens and the first point is the healthcare workers, the frontline workers, they need to be vaccinated. Secondly, it's the elderly and those at risk. Remember that we're still in phase 3 trials and this hasn't been tested on everybody. So again, that has to be carefully monitored. Patient safety is absolutely mandatory here. And then there are 236 vaccines that are under research. There are 38 clinical trials going on. As time goes on, there'll be more and more local pharmaceutical companies in Asia being approved, and that's going to help with the rollout. But I think in timelines, a country like Singapore, of course, we're a small population, probably by third quarter next year. A larger country such as Indonesia, it may take at least 2 years to vaccinate everybody. I mean, polio vaccine has been out for over 60 years. We're still trying to get everybody vaccinated with polio. So, I think it's not going to be a one injection fixes the problem. It's going to be a continuous fight. It's going to be a combination of what we're doing now, which is distancing and being careful. But obviously, once the vaccine comes out and we do manage to vaccinate the healthcare workers and the elderly and those at risk, it's going to be much, much better situation.
Okay, fantastic. So quite a lot about risk management, really, and understanding who needs to get it as urgently as possible. Okay, thank you. Jens, just to come over to you, what should people be doing who are looking to prepare for the distribution of this vaccine? Yeah, so we had all these conversations about potential dry ice shortages, and there are different opinions out there. We know that UPS, that's just for the US, not for Asia, decided to add another, I think, something like 5 tons of dry ice production per day or something like that, so 120 pounds. And you can do all these calculations back and forth, but what we clearly see is that
across all the temperature ranges, it's not just the availability of the dryers, it's kind of trickled down even to raw material suppliers and availability. We see this from customers coming in that, there are a lot of questions about availability of 2 to 8 packaging or the -80 packaging in January, February, March, and so on. So even if what we clearly would like to say here, even if you're kind of in an earlier stage of the project, and Michael mentioned that there are 30, 50, 100, depending on how many, I think WHO is listing something like 50 in clinical right now, or 38, you said, something like that in that area. Even if you're in an earlier stage, it is absolutely crucial to plan as early as possible, because also the packaging providers already ramp up, and that's what we do. We increase capacity as much as possible, but it is also about sourcing raw materials, and therefore it is absolutely crucial to plan as early as possible. And even if not all variables of a project are known yet, it is absolutely helpful to share as much information with 2, 3, 4 different potential partners for the rollout, so that they can prepare and maybe adjust later. But yeah, have as much information available as early as possible.
Okay, thanks very much, Jens. So conversations like this are really important, I guess. Getting as much information up front as we can, and making decisions as early as possible to make sure any bumps in the road can be dealt with efficiently. Okay, so that really is the end of our topics. We do have a couple of questions, and then I'll come around each of our experts for any closing remarks. Just to run through these questions that we've had in advance quickly. Dry ice has been central to maintaining ultra-cold temperature. The capacity of dry ice shipments has been significantly limited in aircraft, with dry ice being poisonous in large quantities. Jens, how can COVID-19s be shipped safely and compliantly in aircraft when using dry ice?
Yeah, so the amount of dry ice, there's regulation out there for many years when it comes to amount of dry ice per packaging, amount of dry ice per equipment or per aircraft, for example, also on the road systems. And it's not so much about the amount of dry ice per packaging; it's more about per aircraft, for example, when we're talking about air freight. South Korea recently announced to increase the allowance from 3,300 kilos to 11 tons per aircraft. United has similar program started. That it's much easier now to move more packaging or more systems with dry ice in an aircraft. So it really depends a little bit on the temperature range and the requirements you need to follow here. But when it comes to dry ice, for example, also the availability of the coolant and all the materials is absolutely crucial.
Okay, thanks very much, Jens. And with regards to the dry ice shortages and availability, what's the most sustainable way to be using the dry ice with regards to the packaging solutions it's used in? Jens, I'll come to you again.
Yeah, so for many years, EPS packaging, and that's still absolutely the standard, is used. But if you do the calculations on dry ice needed for all this, we're talking about really a lot of dry ice, and just cutting the amount of dry ice needed for one shipment. And if you scale this up to the whole project over a period of, let's say, a year or two, this is huge numbers. So it has not just the effect to address the problem that availability of dry ice might be a problem, but also the amount of or the number of shipments that could be shipped on an aircraft if there's only half the amount of dry ice in every box, for example. So what we did is we also launched a packaging range that is based on BIP's vacuum insulation panel, reusable packaging with vacuum insulation panels that offers the same or even better performance, 120 hours roughly, using half the amount of dry ice. So that this will help to reduce the amount of dryers needed per shipment, and also increase the number of packaging or shipments that is allowed on equipment, on aircraft.
Okay, thanks very much, Jens. So just to answer a couple of questions quickly myself. As I say, if you have put any questions in the comments, have any after, please email marketing@intelsius.com. We will get back to you as soon as possible. To go through a couple of final questions, how much dry ice is required to achieve performance? That can all be found in the product sheets at the right-hand side in the files. But if you do have any questions about a specific size solution, please get in touch with us. How long do Orca solutions maintain deep frozen temperatures of below? That is 96 hours, a minimum of 96 hours. Is that correct, Jens?
Depends on the upper temperature limit you're looking at. All the qualification reports we offer for the VIP insulated dryers shippers offer a upper limit of -20 degrees, but also an upper limit of -60 degrees. And it varies. It depends a little bit on the size of the packaging, but in general, you could say it's something like 96 hours plus against -60, and 120 hours against -20 as an upper limit. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation. As we've mentioned, things are changing all the time. So we are hoping to do more Asia-based webinars, answers to specific COVID vaccination distribution in upcoming months, probably having one in January, the next webinar. So please follow Intelsius social media channels for all the latest updates. I'll now come around each of our expert speakers for some closing remarks. John, we'll come to you first. Obviously, gave us some great insight into the characteristics of vaccine earlier.
Okay. Sure. I mean, my closing comments is I think we'll see a lot of activity in Q1, Q2 this coming 2021 in the sense of regulators are looking already at a number of potential phase 3 trials. And I think certainly the AstraZeneca and others we will see coming through Q1, Q2. So I think come summer, we will have more of an ammunition, which we need across the world that will enable us to make informed decisions. So I think 2021 should be a year of solution, whereas 2020 to some extent was a year of chaos.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I'm sure a lot of people will be very relieved to hear that. Jens, across to you next. Some closing remarks from yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to highlight that we put together a list you can ask us for with all the questions we suggest to ask yourself if you are preparing to roll out a vaccine or plan a distribution project later next year. And this is a very complete list covering things like what's the temperature range you're looking at, what's the duration you need for your region, is single use required or multi-use or reusable packaging an option, return logistics, cleaning refurbishment processes. So it's a long list of questions which helps really, tick the boxes and say, did I ask that question to myself? Is it something? Is there more information needed for me? And I can only say that it is really helpful to have a much better overview. Where are the gaps when you're planning a project, and discuss that with all your vendors and partners. And as I said earlier, I think it's really helpful to start this process as early as possible, even if it's an ongoing thing over the next, let's say, for example, we heard that there might be a rollout for AstraZeneca, mid next year or something, or something like that. So even if you're saying, okay, we expect a rollout mid next year, end next year, it's definitely helpful to start this now and maybe work through the list and see where the gaps are that need to be answered over the next few months. So if you want to see that, send an email to marketing, to Matt, and we will share this information.
Great, thanks very much, Jens. Lim, coming over to you now. Fantastic to have you on the call as well. Could you give us your closing comments, please?
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to thank you, John. Thank you, Michael, for coming, making this event interesting. And thank you all for coming. So we have a lot of questions to be answered, actually, and people have written to us. So I guess like Jens and Matt has said, please email us so that we could answer your questions. Everybody knows that there's a local hero with Intelsius here in Asia. So do talk to your local hero. I'm sure the local hero would happily come back to Jens, the specialist, about the cold chain. And we can all, as you all can see, we can tap into Michael's experience and also John's experience in answering the questions that we have had from Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, and Malaysia and Indonesia. So there's been a tons of questions which is not covered here in this webinar. So that's why we thought there would be a second number 2 webinar, somewhere in January, Matt. So yeah, keep the questions coming. Keep safe, everybody, and thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks very much, Lim. Yeah, there will be more webinars, a massive array of content to cover, and with things changing so often, it's an exciting thing to discuss at the moment. And finally, over to you, Michael. It's been great having you on board. Could you...
Thank you, Matt, and the Intelsius team. And John, you've got my vote. I will be up there queuing up my vaccines. So thank you for the confidence that you've put into us. I think the final comment I'd like to make is that it's a global problem, and we can only fight this as a team. And what we saw in the beginning of COVID was some pretty horrendous behavior from specific countries, closing their borders, stockpiling, not sharing PPE, nationalizing the priorities. And of course, there's reasons for them to do that, but we can't afford to do that in the vaccination program. And, I would reach out to RECAP. That's the largest, trade association formed this year with 15 countries in Asia. RECAP has to start, if they haven't already done this, but they have to make sure that if vaccines cross borders, that there's no border controls, that basically it's wheels down clearance. Because if we start losing days, hours and days on trying to customs clear and pay duties and taxes on vaccines, it defeats the object of trying to save the population. So, I think just to cry out to humanity, we've got to solve this together. The vaccines are on the way, but we've got to stop building walls and helping each other in the neighborhoods. So thank you again for having me.
No, and yeah, thanks again for all our experts for joining. And thanks to all our audience members that have joined throughout the call. It's been fantastic having you on board. We hope you have a fantastic end to this year, and we'll continue the conversations and speak soon in the new year. So with that, we'll end the webinar, but thanks again, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.